I'm going to close the discussion to just us as a board here and clarify, so I understand what you're asking, to have the letter removed from his file, correct?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair.
So, and you're asking for the letter to remain in his file or to approve the grievance, not a grievance,
Well,
correct?
I'm asking that the board deny the grievance, which would result in the letter remaining in his personnel file.
Okay. Discussion amongst us as board. Concerns?
I have one quick question for Mrs. Maloney.
Yes.
You made a comment right when you started talking about data.
Yes.
What can be shared with us as board members? Because we have nothing, I have nothing in front of me that spells out anything, what you guys are talking about. But typically in the past, and I've been on the board, longer than Mrs. Unger, but we used to have that information. In fact, I've worked with you many times.
Yes.
None of this is shared with us.
Well,
So
typically you would
can
have the
that-
grievance and the underlying disciplinary letter, and probably the email that Mark sent to the board member.
And we got that this afternoon. I have no other underlying information in front. I don't think anyone else does on this either. So, I mean, and that's just a general question, not specifically to this, but we've had some other instances too that we're asked to make decisions and we're not given the information because it's private. Well, when we're as a board collective, as a board of directors, I think we have an interest in seeing that information. Am I correct?
That's correct. If it's going to come to you at a grievance where you have to make a decision, you have the right to see it. And you can share it with other board members or administrators who have a need to know, but can't share it with anyone else.
Exactly. Okay, thank you for that clarification.
And one other point, the timing of giving that private information to the board, especially in a case of a grievance or a lawsuit, might be delayed until close to the meeting with the hope that the case would settle, and then you would never have to hear about it.
Perfect, thank you.
But the grievance is in relation to a letter of reprimand of which we cannot see, correct? Is that kind of what you stated?
Well, I think you can see it.
You can see it.
I was under-
You
Did I
can't
misunderstand?
disclose
I
it to
thought
anybody
Patty
else.
said it went to them today. Do they have it?
It-
I was in the misunderstanding. We weren't supposed to send a letter.
Oh,
based on our
they're certainly entitled to have it, and we could forward it to you.
Yeah, so I mean, I was under the understanding that we could not have the letter of reprimand.
No, you should.
Oh, no, you need to have the letter of reprimand,
So-
because he's asking to have it taken out.
We need to have the letter of reprimand.
You do?
I can send it right now.
Okay, you're sending it? Okay.
Like I said, we've had other instances, and I think I just want to get that clear, so we know that when we have to terminate an employee or something, we need to have some of the facts, and we're not always getting them.
Right.
So,
And I'd also like to have distinction, there's like a letter of directive and then there's a letter of reprimand. And you get, I see that here, so,
Well, and of course, in different cases, there could be a notice of discharge or whatever the item is that triggered the filing the grievance. Because typically, then you need to know what that is so you can make a decision about whether it should be removed from the file or to uphold the administration's recommendation.
I do think it's accurate to say there's nothing that the board's not entitled to.
Well, and because we
In terms of the
question, I mean, just so everybody else is clear too, that we did question about the letter of reprimand, and we're understood that that could not be released, so that's why nobody has it effective.
And that's
right now.
correct too, that it can't be released. As Pat and I said, this is it's the razor's edge.
So we can read it, we can see it,
Right.
we
You
can't
can-
read it out loud.
Right.
And so we're not vested with the authority to close the board meeting to ensure its confidentiality. So it's a peculiar, Ms. Maloney and I talked about this 2 weeks ago, trying to think of some solution. And I think that her counsel is appropriate, that if you're going to err on the side of opening or closing a board meeting, it's always best to err on having it open. Closing it creates a whole new set of problems that we don't want to visit about.
So we will wait for that.
Sorry, I can't access
Oh, well,
it.
we can't, this meeting is required to be open under the open meeting law, and I can read you the statute numbers, I think it's 13.43.
I think we're okay with that.
We don't have a problem with
It's just
that.
that we need to see the letter
I
of
think there's
reprimand.
been some kind of a miscommunication, with what can be shared with board members and what
Yeah,
can't be shared.
I'm sorry if we
Some-
had a miscommunication with Liz, but I thought
Yep.
it's my understanding that you would receive a copy of it earlier today.
Mr. Chair, is it, or Pat, maybe I'll ask you, is it okay, since this is just going to come to us now, that we take a brief recess to give us time to look at it?
Sure, I mean, I'll have to quick pull out the principal's contract. I don't believe you have to make a decision tonight, but you don't want to have a special board meeting over this, so maybe once you get it emailed to you, we take a 5-minute break or whatever, and people have a chance to read it.
The board has 10 days to decide.
But there probably
But
isn't
you're-
another
you're
meeting
here
scheduled
and-
within that period.
I think once we get the letter, then we can decide whether we want to continue this tonight
Sure.
or whether we need to come back again.
And Liz, if that's
We can
difficult,
have
we can
that.
just run some copies too. Okay.
It's here.
Modern technology.
Oh, do you hear the ding?
Oh, I hear it coming in.
All right.
Mr. Chair, could I move for a recess for 10 minutes?
Yep, is there a second?
Second.
We are in recess until 6:05. Had a chance to read the letter?
Mr. Chair, I would like it noted on the record that I did write this letter on behalf of the administration.
Okay. Thank you for that. Just, once again, we cannot share the contents of this letter outside of ourselves, actually. So don't share this with anybody and don't discuss specific parts. Discussion amongst the board. And if anybody has questions for either party, you're welcome to ask them directly.
Are there differences between, this is fairly new, I'm sure to many of us, but letter of directive versus letter of reprimand? This would be a letter of reprimand?
Yes.
In Mr. Miley's?
And there would be a difference. A letter of directive is not considered to be disciplinary,
Okay.
whereas a letter of reprimand is, although it does not adversely affect any term or condition of employment. It's more like a warning.
Okay. What are the ramifications of a letter of reprimand? Or do they vary from circumstance? I mean,
Well, like when a letter of reprimand includes a directive, then if the employee should violate that in the future, they could be subject to additional discipline. Depending upon their union contract, could involve suspensions with or without pay, withholding salary increments, or potentially discharge. But that would also be true of a letter of directive, that an employee is required to follow any directives they receive, and failure to do so is insubordination. What makes this unique is this really goes to an ethical concern, the conflict of interest, trying to promote a family or friend to be hired by the district. And that impacts the district's ability then to have the support of the community in the event in future years you need to go out for another levy or anything. You want them to make sure that you're spending taxpayers' dollars wisely and hiring the best qualified person for the vacancy, which may turn out to be. And in fact, in this case, you should know that Mrs. Miley was hired for the position.
right.
I might add one thing to Pat's answer, and because she talked about the significance of a letter of reprimand and future discipline if other things happen. For school principals, and I'd say for all school administrators, the question is often on employment applications or is asked, have you ever been disciplined? And it is significant if you're able to answer that question, no. And that is a huge dividing line here between a letter of directive and a letter of reprimand. If this is a letter of directive and formatted as such, then Mr. Miley would be able to answer that question, have you ever been disciplined? No. And that's a significant deal to us. And I do think Pat's right as well, that to the extent there are claims of ethical matters, that also can involve other venues or forums, people's license, those kinds of things. And that use of the language in this letter is one of the reasons we're here, is because that it is a high kind of claim here.
I see that our administrator master's agreement does not talk about discipline, but our employees does. And so again, it reinforces the high level of ethical behavior we're looking for in our administrators. Because it's not even referenced in our contract with administrators about discipline.
Question, Mrs. Maloney. And this comes from, I have progressive, in the many of the positions I've been in, progressive discipline and how it works. Why was it chosen that we went right over an oral warning to a written warning or reprimand to step 2?
Well, that's the sort of thing I'm reluctant to discuss on the public record. But that's the discretion with any employer. And certainly an allegation that someone tried to unduly influence their relative for being hired in a position is a very serious matter. It's not like being late to work.
Other questions? Comments?
One question I had was, getting back to, both the oral conversations and the email, if there was a difference between trying to influence or asking for someone to do something on behalf of Mrs. Miley versus asking for information or trying to, wonder if there's a distinction there or not, or, because wasn't it asked a few times if anything, if Mr. Miley asked for anything really to be done on behalf of his wife, or if he was...
Well, you'll have to decide that yourself, but there wasn't any testimony that Mr. Miley was asking Sandy for information, because Sandy didn't really know anything about it. But he's calling an authority figure who has the ultimate decision-making authority to complain about something. Multiple times, even if you didn't ask her to do something specific, I think it's a fair inference that he wanted her to do something.
The part, I visited with Mr. Miley about this. The part that I struggle with, when you take a senior principal in our district and it enters your mind to have a conversation with another principal, regardless of tenure, yet brand new, but the hiring of a position in that building, oh yeah, it happens to be your wife. I think that's a challenge. I struggle with one, just the thought process that would encourage you to do that. And it's your wife. We're not even talking about a best friend, how that can be a conflict. There is, how there isn't, whoa, hands off. I mean, that would be like me calling my wife's boss and talk about her job performance. What? That's not my deal. That's my wife's and her employer's situation. Whether I passionately agree, disagree, whatever, that has nothing to do with me.
Sure.
I might hear about it when we get home. I might hear about it because I didn't come and defend her, but that's not my position.
Right. What is it?
And I struggle with, and how can another, there was reference made to Mr. Gogley. I spoke to Mr. Gogley personally, 6:30 in the morning. How is he supposed to, as a brand new principal in our district, how do I confront, and maybe confront's not the right word, but how do I handle the situation? Putting both people in a heck of a predicament as far as I'm concerned. One, that it came up. Two, he's going to try to discuss it. Let alone from our senior principal in our district. Who, and how do you, when someone else is reprimanded in your building, how do you carry on a conversation with the employee's spouse? I struggle with that. Maybe I'm wrong. Very well could be. I just struggle with that thought process.
So do we need a vote at this time? What is our next course of action?
Can I ask one question? clarification. I feel a little bit behind the 8 ball as perhaps my other 2 colleagues that were not here last summer when this was done. It's too bad this didn't get brought forward before the new board was set. But just so I understand this, Mr. Gagalai was instructed, he was hiring for both of the positions at both elementary schools, is that correct? Was overseeing that, or was this a hire, were both elementaries hiring a similar position?
Actually, the position was posted just for Kennedy.
It was just for
originally.
Kennedy, all right.
And then through the interview process, Jerry was able to find some more funds. And
Okay.
so to keep the buildings mirrored, we were able to fill
So that's where,
both.
okay.
And you can look that in our old board minutes from that
And then
time.
the
We
second-
talked about the need for these positions.
Yep. No, the second question I have is, when did we discover the error that this should have been the board involved, or the district involved in the interview process? How did that come about, or just some I guess
Well-
I want to hear the district side on that one.
Because it's part of the SIG grant, the district has responsibility for the hires.
Okay.
And there was a miscommunication about that early on. And then we clarified that, and then we did both. I sat down with both applicants. I know that Liz and Cheryl and the building principals, I wasn't in on that. The
Todd was in
principal.
the interviews, Nate was not.
Okay. But then they went through it again. Is that correct? Want to make sure I have it
It was
right.
basically a three-interview process for the Latino liaison role. We also have the Somali role. The Somali position, one of them was already actually hired and for Kennedy. And then we realized through the grant, because the grant, I don't know if you've seen it, I haven't seen the whole thing, but it's extremely long and extremely detailed. But the LEA is supposed to make those final decisions. And so because Cheryl Nash is the owner essentially of that grant, she let us know, wait a minute, brakes on, stop. We need to get involved here. And so that's why things went to a second interview. And then because it was such a tough decision, it went to a third. And then Jerry was able to find funding for the 2 positions. And the Somali position opened up for Roosevelt specifically after.
So did we re-interview even that Somali position that we had hired? Did we redo that whole process?
We
then?
didn't redo that one because
Okay.
that offer was already extended.
That was already
and
extended,
accepted.
okay. But no offer was extended?
No.
Nothing was done, it was just, the process was working and then this was discovered?
Correct.
Did we communicate that with the applicants at all, or or did we just keep working it until we got to the bottom of it?
There was no direct communication to the applicants that I'm aware of. I certainly didn't send any communication, so whether Todd was keeping them informed or not, I'm not sure. I know the first interview, I don't remember specifically how many people were interviewed, but I'm sure it was 4 or 5. And then the second interview, I think if I remember, it was 4. And then that's the one that the LEA, so the district, myself, Cheryl included, were part of that second
Okay.
interview.
And the whole time frame from start to finish, what do you guess?
Oh gosh, I'd have to look it up, but
Couple weeks?
couple, 3 weeks tops,
weeks?
but I think 2 weeks, and I could look it up, but
Okay.
yeah. I mean, it was a few days, like, kind of in between interview
We have some dates in front of us here. I don't know if those are available to share, but there were dates given as to when the email was sent and when the interview took place. And that's within our notes.
Any other questions for Mr. Arneson or Mrs. Maloney?
Does it fall within our authority to basically vote yea or nay? Or, I thought there was made mention of reformulating the,
From my understanding, the way it sits right now, and I will ask for clarification from both parties here, a motion could be made to deny the grievance. Help me where I may be wrong. That tells Mr. Miley that he can accept it as is, or can move on to arbitration, correct?
Yes.
Is that a fair?
Or he could also make a counter proposal to try to settle it before he goes to
Okay,
arbitration.
I mean, that continues the process. Is that a fair assessment, Mr. Arneson?
Yes.
Or the other side is, I would assume that someone could make a motion to withdraw.
Or
the
to
letter-
grant the grievance.
To grant the grievance,
Which would result
Which would
in
remove
no letter
that.
being in his file.
expunging the letter from his record. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Mr. Arneson, we're in agreements on that?
I think, yes.
Okay. That answer your question?
Yeah, I was just, so there couldn't be a motion to entertain to,
I don't know that that's our,
that's
Place to go
the
down.
question to.
Right,
I must have misunderstood.
The
We're
rule is
not-
to grant or deny the
Or
grievance.
deny,
we're not the ones giving the letters or.
Yeah, you're not the author of the letter,
That's
so.
not-
And
Sure,
when
I
you
will.
deny the grievance, that means it goes to the next stage. And
Yes.
so more people would be involved and it would go to, what does that process look like?
Well, the next, certainly the parties at any time can negotiate a settlement.
Right, I
So far,
understand.
we haven't had any settlement offers. But be that as it may, if the parties don't reach a settlement, we write to the Bureau of Mediation Services, state agency. They send us a list of arbitrators. We strike names until one remains, so that person is chosen to hear the case. And then they will get a detailed hearing, much more detailed than you had tonight. And that will be most likely be a closed hearing because it is not a public board meeting. And then the arbitrator will issue a decision. And for all practical purposes, that decision is final and binding. There's very limited grounds to appeal it.
Okay. All right. So, are you
Fair.
looking for a motion, Nate?
I'm looking for whatever you as a board would like to do.
I will move to deny the grievance.
There's a motion, is there a second?
Second it.
There's a motion, a second to deny the grievance. Further discussion? I would like this to be a roll call. Go ahead.
Linda Mathiasen?
Is it nay or?
You're denying the grievance, so now you vote for the motion.
I would say yay. Yes.
Mike Carlson?
What do I normally say?
Yay.
Dan Grunquist?
Aye.
Liz Vanderbilt?
Aye.
Nate Street?
Aye.
Jackie Salisbury?
Nay.
Mike Reynolds?
Aye.
The motion to deny the grievance passes 6-1.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we do appreciate the courtesies of the board and your interest and questions.
Thank you. Moving on, board committee reports. Ms. Mathiasen? Nothing over Christmas?
No, however, committee selection,
We're coming back to that.
yes, because there's lots of agendas happening with committees.
That's right, we're going to come back to it. Mr. Kronquist?
None.
Yes, thank you for asking. One of the things that I noticed on the committee we'll talk about when we get done is that my term on the foundation went to 2015 now.
What did you say, 25 years?
No, 2015. But we did not have a foundation meeting because of people being down south. However, a few of us, Patty Doles and Brad Schmidt and I all got together, and we are going to plan a retreat or a kind of a work session to kind of refocus our mission and kind of take the foundation into the future. So I'll have some more information on that probably in the spring. So, but we did grant some activity fees by a voice vote on the telephone. So that's kind of what we took care of, some activity fees.
Very
Mr.
good.
Reynolds, I talked to Patty and suggested she was thinking about finding a facilitator.
Yes, and I've got a couple names.
What do you think about Bruce Miles? Would he work for that?
Well, we could certainly,
I might be able to force him to do that
that's kind of a gratis thing maybe.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk offline about that. And I got another one here in town that would.
Okay. Yeah,
That's
I
kind
just
of, you know,
thought
not.
I'd throw that out.
Well, we kind of thought maybe, Bruce Miles' name did come up, but we thought maybe we could find someone that worked away from school districts
Sure, yeah.
and and the Central Minnesota Foundation.
That'd be good.
Just kind of a neutral
Separate focus.
business
And
leader.
that'd be fine.
So,
I'll just
but
throw that out.
not that we're not,
Yeah.
we haven't, we're far from deciding.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, anything else?
No,
Okay, acknowledgement of gifts and donations. A donation of $262 from Tracy Erickson to the Willmar High School Activities Fund for Nordic skiing. Donation of $750 from Willmar Takedown Club towards funding a middle school wrestling coach. Donation of $2,500 from Jenny O for first robotics team for 2013, with a pledge to be a $5,000 donor next year. Donation of $500 from BG Amundsen Construction. Do we know where they're from?
Benson.
Benson, very good. For the first robotics at the senior high. Committee assignments. The reason I went over this quick is I want you, if you would email me if you have a preference of something you'd like to serve on, something you think you have strengths on, or something you want to stay away from. If you would please email that to me. I will bring that for approval to the next regular board meeting, because that has to be approved, so that would be the February meeting. Okay? Everybody okay with that? Anything else?
We combined some boards,
Yeah.
committees.
There-
It should be on your reorganization, you got a listing of
Right.
who's on there
They're
now.
also
and-
listed on the district website under the school board tab, and you go under, and there's a nice table showing who's on what.
Okay.
And
What happened to personnel? Are they,
I think we need to revisit a couple of those.
I was wondering if they're standing alone or are they combined
it's
with?
part of the labor
It's labor-
management.
labor negotiation and
Yeah,
personnel.
they were
That's
combined.
what my question
Yeah.
was.
And more, and if you talk about committee meetings, we did have one of those, and it was kind of more of a labor issue than a contract negotiation piece. It was like, what do we do
forgot
in
about
regard
that
to
one, yeah.
in regard to the IT
That was over
positions?
Christmas.
Because we had IT positions, and we had a number that we needed to hire, and those are experts and specialists in those fields, but they're miscellaneous employees. And so if you understand what miscellaneous is, we don't have a contract for them, and so we did have a labor management, but that would have been under the previous personnel committee. So it was kind of nice to be able to use our knowledge. I don't know what you thought, Mike, but I thought it was nice to use my knowledge from the labor committee and negotiations, and to be able to talk about personnel. So I thought it was a nice fit, but we can discuss and see if we want to separate it again.
We made kind of a lame effort in having the committees, when you have meetings, submit a written report, so we don't have this happen. Oh, yeah, that was right.
I
It'd
think
be
you
nice
should
if
appoint, no, you
the
should
secretary
appoint
of
a
each group
person.
submit, just like the principals do, submit a
Right.
written report of the committees, and we don't have to go through it, it's on here, read it, take it, information. So as we get those, we will appoint secretaries to give us.
Especially if there's more than one board member, just put an asterisk by who you want that to be issued from, and then during the board meeting, you can add to it.
Anything else?
Dish that.
Otherwise, motion to adjourn?
so moved.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.